such things happen, Michael, when a terrorist organization captured a whole country, and the government which was elected democratically, it is not there now. So, what impact do you see in this region will be there, uh, including India and other countries? What does it?
Well, firstly, I have to say, I think the partnership that exists between the United States and India has never been more important than it is right at this moment. I recognize that. I think anyone concerned about Western India interests recognizes how important India is to this, and the proximity and generally the good balance that they have brought. I think in their policy approach over the last week and a half, I think it's reassuring. And I think that's the other disappointing aspect of Biden's decision. I do not understand, after making such colossal errors, I don't want to say errors of judgment, because I believe this is where they intended to end up. There's no telephonic communication with Xi Jinping, no communication with Vladimir Putin, no communication with your head of state, Modi, no communication with the Pakistanis or the Saudis. It to me is utterly baffling. And the only way to justify not communicating with heads of state when you have a change of regime that we have facilitated is when you don't have a very good explanation as to why it's happened, and ensuring the stability of the government before we left. Now, the Biden administration responds saying, well, the Trump administration had entered into this agreement to leave Afghanistan. Yes, but it was a condition-based agreement. So if the conditions by the Taliban, as it relates to the harboring of terrorists, for instance, as it relates to attacking US forces, for instance, or NATO forces, were not being met, then we would simply not depart at that point, because the conditions would not have been met. So it's a complete misrepresentation of former President Trump's fairly sound, I think, agreement that he had reached on this. And I'm not trying to minimize the complexity of Afghanistan. This is going to be a very rocky road, even with the best of management of this situation. But I don't see how you look at this any other way but conclude that this was the precise intended result. And then that raises the question, if American lives and American interests and Afghan lives and Afghan interests were not the predominant consideration in the development of these policies, what was? Committed to this sort of reckless, essentially abandonment of Afghanistan without conditional requirements in that agreement, in the Doha Agreement, being met. And those conditions really have not been made, or we wouldn't be having dead Marines landing at Dover, Delaware, and we wouldn't be having elements of ISIS and Al-Qaeda already making their presence known in Afghanistan. So clearly the Taliban have been harboring terrorists, which isn't surprising, I think, to anyone who's followed the Taliban's actions since the 1990s. And very clearly, they're driven by a very toxic anti-American and anti-Western sentiment. And those are two essentially violating principles that were in the Trump with China's Communist Party. You can't diminish that element as a possibility here. And as you well know, and as I think India well knows, China's developmental agenda for that region is immensely threatening to India, to the United States, to the West generally. And let's not forget, we've kind of handled China's Communist Party pretty diplomatically for many years now, that this is the most murderous regime in modern times, exceeding even that of the former Soviet Union, in 60, 70, 80 million Chinese killed by their own government, engaged now in definitional genocide, according to our own intelligence reports and the designation that our former Secretary of State put on Xi Jinping prior to leaving office. And that, by the way, that distinction remains. Not many regimes that have gotten that very dismal and negative stigma of genocide attached to them. China's Communist Party is now a genocidal regime. And I think our policy needs to begin reflecting the reality of what we confront there, not the imagined vision that these sinologists from the 90s had about what a growing China would mean to the world. I'd like to hear more from Pakistan. I mean, in my judgment, I've worded it this way that, you know, the Taliban are very close to being a creation. Yeah, there's a nuclear power country. It's an immensely populous country. It's a powerful country. And they have a historical tie to the Taliban. So yeah, it's immensely troubling to me. It's one of the reasons I say our relationship with India becomes more important. And I would like to hear more out of Pakistan right now. It's not going to be a very good 20th anniversary of 9/11 for, you know, for at the former Twin Towers or at the Pentagon to be getting up and reading once again in another year all of these victims from 9/11. And now we are literally right back to where we were on September 10th, 2001, with the Taliban in control, maybe even more powerful today than they were in 2001. I think that's almost indisputable. Taliban 2.0 or, you know, new Taliban. This is some of the silliest conversation that's existing. And the sad reality is it's very dangerous rhetoric because that should be the position of the United States of America, and that should be the position of our national security policy. India is, you know, growing in importance by the minute, I believe, to the United States. And really, in the absence of India, this situation would look much, much bleaker. So I'm pleased, and I believe that the relationship that exists between India and the United States is really, I mean, it's really much more developed and improved than it was like 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's really constructive. And, you know, my sense on this is we want to give India every good assurance. I was not at all comfortable with the CCP's challenging of India's sovereignty. That deserved a global condemnation, probably should have been addressed.
हमने की गलती फिर एक बार, कोरोना ने किया दोबारा प्रहार। मास्क, 2 गज दूरी, करें अपनी सुरक्षा पूरी। कोरोना टीका हम सबको लगाना है, मिलकर साथ समझदारी से कोरोना को हराना है।